Well, hello there, gracious gang. It is time for another installment of the Gracious Guest Podcast, and I'm your host, Mike Creevy, with you as always. And I am on a walk today, something I haven't done in a while for one of these shows, but something that does have some therapeutic value, I think, for me at least, and maybe it creates a little ambiance for you. See, here's a car going by. That's just real life. I mean, that's what happens. You're out and about doing your thing, and other people are doing their thing, and, you know, that's sort of the raw, out in the real world gracious guest kind of show here. So we're going to go with that, see where we get. And that kind of ties in a little bit to the thing I wanted to talk about today, which is this idea of your life story. And you hear that phrase, or you hear people say to you, so what's your story? In fact, the one example of that, for whatever reason, that came to my mind just now was its usage in the 1992, I think, 91, something like that, Terminator 2, when they make their escape, and Linda Hamilton's character, Sarah Connor, is seeing Arnold Schwarzenegger's Terminator character. They haven't really figured, she hasn't been brought up to speed yet with the fact that he's a reprogrammed and good Terminator. She just looks at him, she's like, so what's your story? And he just kind of turns and stares at her. Anyways, if you've seen that movie, you know what I'm talking about with that. But it's a good question. What's your story? And I think the reason I think this is important at the core of it is because the premise, really, the assumption, the start point, the foundation that question is built on is something I think has really been lost in the way we live our lives a lot of time these days, and namely that there is a story. And what is a story? It's something it's got a structure, it has a purpose. I mean, a good story does. I mean, there's some movies and books you read that are just stupid, because not because the person didn't have a good command of the language, or because they weren't creative in a sense, in some ways, but there's no plot, there's no story. It's just things happen, and that's it. It's like that old depressing statement. I'm going to modify it, of course, this is a sort of a family show, but, in other words, the phrase, crap happens and then you die. Well, okay, that's, you could make that case, I guess, but that's a pretty miserable way to live your life, I think. So, I think this is right at the heart of what I try to do here on the Gracious Guest with podcasts, blogs, YouTube videos now I'm doing more of, and then the presentations and stuff I give. Certainly with my sort of experience, my read in the realm of Catholic theology, at the heart of it, the gospel, the revelation of God's plan to all people, at the heart of it is a story. There's that old, the greatest story ever told, right? Why does that title stick? Well, not story in terms of it's just made up. Story in terms of a plot, a purposeful narrative that frames not just my life, not just a particular country's history or a particular organization or political party's sort of scope on things, but the universe itself, existence itself. That it's not just a random assortment of just sheer facts, but that there's a story behind it. There's love. There's a purpose, a reason behind things. I would argue that we're all hoping that that's true. That deep down, I think even those of us who might be the biggest skeptics tend to maybe find themselves, occasionally at least, asking the question, why am I here? What is the purpose of life? Is there a purpose of life? What's the meaning of life? How do I who do I give thanks to for this beautiful experience, this sunset, this moment in life that is a unique experience I've just gone through, and I'm immediately hit by an urge to give thanks for that. Well, what's that? I mean, if it's just a sheer random occurrence that just happens and there's no overarching purpose or real beauty behind it, well, then why would I want to give thanks for it? It's just, well, there it is. But I really think we know better. I think if we're honest, we really know better. We know that there's much more behind the scenes than what we can see, what we can detect. And we have those lucid moments in life where that becomes really obvious, I think, really clear. We also find ourselves looking for help, looking for someone or something to lean on when things aren't so good, aren't so beautiful. Crying out in all sorts of different ways for justice when there's injustice. Well, why do we do that? Oh, we don't do it just because it's a fact that this terrible thing just happened to this group of people, and, well, hey, what are you going to do? It's just random, right? No one had that attitude with the whole experience of Nazi Germany, right? I mean, like, nobody realistically, or, not most people at least, just sat back and was like, well, hey, that's how it works. No, there's like this gut reaction that this is wrong. This does not fit in the overarching end game, the overarching purpose of the story. And like any good story, there are bad things that happen in the story. There are obstacles that come up. There are even terrible occurrences in a good story. But as you're reading it, there's an expectation of some degree. There's a hope, if nothing else, that somehow that obstacle will be overcome, that harmony will be restored. There's an understanding that harmony and peace and fulfillment and joy, like that's the peak. That's what everything is supposed to move towards. That's what you hold out hope for when times are bad. And I think that's significant. I don't just brush that aside in your own life as just wishy-washy thinking, or, oh, well, that's just, that's just wishful thinking. That's just what I kind of, naturally hope for. I would argue, why, though? Point to anything in life that, for a sure thing gets better with time, right? The principle we see all around us a lot of times is separation, decay, death, things wear out and give out. We're faced constantly, everywhere we look, with the reality of how nothing is lasting. Yet, every one of us has somewhere in us some expectation, some hope for a lasting experience, for a happy ending, for resolution, for fulfillment. Where does that come from? These are just some important things I think for us to think about, and a lot of times we don't think at all anymore about some of these things. So just in a very general way, I'm not, really getting into specific theology or anything now. I just want to invite you today to think about this idea. What's your story? Is your life, when you look at your life in particular, within that overarching framework I just mentioned, where I think we see a lot of these themes just, everywhere, look at your life. What's your story? Do you sort of go about your life as we often do? And I think a lot of us fall into this. I know I do, Do you find yourself at least sometimes going through periods of your life where your life, quote unquote, is just a series of experiences? Your life is just an endless litany of events and experiences. Bucket list stuff. What's your life? What's your life all about? Well, my life, Mike Creevy's life is, I did this, and I did this, and I went here, and I went there, and I went to this country, and I did that, and I went to that party. I posted that picture on Instagram. I plunged in an icy river in January. As great as a lot of those things can be, as enriching as those sort of experiences can be, my fear is that a lot of times today we have sort of limited, impoverished our whole concept of what our lives mean and what our lives are and what they're for by just bringing them down to the lowest common denominator of just an endless series of things we just do and experience. Well, let me tell you, folks, it's no mistake. It shouldn't surprise any of us that when you look at the sociological data of how much extreme depression and horrific levels of suicide have skyrocketed precisely at the same time that this cultural sort of shift has become more and more apparent. I don't think it should surprise any of us that they're at least correlated, if not directly causal. In other words, in the last few decades, as we have pursued as a society a greater and greater adherence at every level of life, every stage of life, to this sort of just random experience-based life, we don't find life worth living. The more freedom and the more access and all this kind of stuff, the more we get what we want, quote-unquote, just stuff, hey, guess what? The more horrifically miserable we all are. Now, I'm not surprised by that, but I have a certain sort of scope and perspective through faith that presents me with some data that I think, some framing that I think makes sense of all of that. You may not agree with that. I'm not sure where you're at in your own sort of faith journey, where you're at in your life, but just, for today, just maybe think about that. Hit me up, shoot me an email over at thegraciousguest@gmail.com. Go to the website, get in touch with me. There's a bunch of ways. There's a contact form on my website, however you want to do that. And, let me know what you think. Let me know if there's a struggle you've been having with this idea of your purpose of life, and trying to find the narrative thread of your own life. Is it worth living, The answer is yes, my friend. It is. It always is, no matter what you're going through. But that's easier said than done sometimes. So you're not alone, and wherever you're at in life, just maybe give that some thought today. Am I just living my life like as a bunch of random events, or is there some kind of story there I can kind of see and kind of line out and step back and get a better context for my own existence, my own life? I think it's a worthwhile endeavor. Thank you so much for tuning in today to the Gracious Guest podcast. I'm your host, Mike Creevy. Thankful, as always, that you've tuned in to the show today. If this is your first time listening, thanks. Welcome to the community. And that's really what I'm hoping to build here, So, like I said, hit me up at thegraciousguest@gmail.com. Go over to YouTube, The Gracious Guest. You get my YouTube videos there. The podcast also appears on YouTube. You can get it on iTunes, Pocket Casts, various other outlets. Please spread the word. Tell your friends. Let's get this effort out there into the hands of into a lot more people's hands, I'll put it that way. So, God bless you, take care, and remember, until next time, don't forget to wonder. Take care.